Okay, so they gave these medals as along the trip, not medals, they were coins. Jefferson and peace and friendship, which is what we call ironic, concerning what's going to happen. And this they turn into a necklace. Basically a medal that you wear, but originally there were coins. And trade, the Hudson Bay Company was coming in as a fur trade. That's why they knew the latitude of the Mandan village. They knew that because Hudson Bay traders from Canada had come into here. And they wanted that fur trade, obviously for beaver, but also they'd heard about the bison and other animals, so open up trade relations with the various tribes. Next, port cities. And they wanted these port cities, great natural harbors all on the Pacific coast, but specifically they're thinking Puget Sound, that area here. Never know what might come down the road. China was becoming very lucrative, and whaling ships that were based here, they had already slaughtered most of the whales here. And so they were going into the Pacific, going to as long as a 5-year voyage. That was big money. And so they wanted to open up ports for that. Next, of course, science. They were going to map, take journals, collect the flora and fauna, and they expected to find dinosaurs because the Industrial Revolution was beginning. You mine more. They're finding more fossils. And so they just assumed they had to be somewhere, or they found woolly mammoths. And woolly mammoth in Siberia, I told classes last week, when they found that woolly mammoth in Siberia, it was frozen solid. And so, of course, the Russian explorers ate it. It's only about 6,000 years old. It was a little tough, a little stringy. Okay, so with that, they also thought they would find weird mythical creatures, maybe men with faces on their stomach, or short, bandy-armed Caucasians who, bandy me kind of muscular, I always think of like Popeye, who spoke Welsh. I wish they would have found them. But the big thing was look for the animals along the way. And they recorded, especially the first leg of the journey, they recorded virtual seas of thousands of bison. That absolutely blew them away. And prairie dog, just they were in awe of prairie dog. They finally would capture one after a couple of days and sent one back to Jefferson. A live prairie dog. It's still alive today. It's going to white off today for everyone. And prairie dogs live for 200 years. Did you guys know that? Relative. Yeah, I do live in a hole. So with that, but the big thing is maps. Here's the map they took of the river, and then you see the Yellowstone, it branches off here, the Milk, here's the Columbia. Really well done maps. So science. And lastly, a Northwest Passage. They thought they were looking for this all-water route from China. Now, of course, over the Arctic was closed up. I should add that the Northwest Passage is now open because of climate change, or will be permanently open. And that will have effects down the road. But there's an all-water route for Britain to get to Japan. Well, they looked at it like this. Jefferson knew the Missouri went to this point right here, turned west. That's all they did. They knew back in Jefferson. But they knew the latitude of the Columbia. And they also thought it has to be symmetrical. Relatively low mountains, relatively low mountains. They would follow the Missouri, get to the source, hopefully be right over kind of a low mountain, get to the top of the divide there, and there'd be the Columbia, jump on, go to the sea. So close to an all-water route. When they got here, what did they find? More and more mountains. Thus, that version of the Northwest Passage failed. The thought was it would take about a year. And not even a year for the whole trip. They would get to here sometime in fall. Hopefully a trading vessel would come by. They would occasionally go up to the Columbia. They jump on board, go all the way around South America, and be back here by the spring or summer of 1805. That's what they thought. Did that happen? No. It took the whole year to get to here, and they barely made it for the winter. Have you ever been in the Dakotas for winter? It's fall. There's nothing to stop the wind from the Arctic. They made it here, and then they discovered other animals here that really surprised them. You know, the fast goats were really cool. And what I'm referring to, antelope. A really big bear, this plains animal, that kind of surprised them. That turned out to be a bad thing for them. But this took another full year to get to here. And they wouldn't have made it without the help of the various tribes along the way, especially the Shoshone and the Nez Perce. They got here, no trading vessel arrived. And so they went back. And this one, they did split up, and Lewis went on the Missouri, Clark went on the Yellowstone and met up here. And that's why we have really good maps of the Yellowstone too. And they made it back here by 1806. And so this was a remarkable journey. This would give the United States a claim. We're not going to go into details of it, of the actual trips of what I just told you right there. But this wasn't the only one. There were other military expeditions to give the United States a stronger claim compared to the Spanish or the British. Remember, this is also to take it from the people who lived there. For example, Zebulon Pike went here and then all the way into Santa Fe. Yes, they walked by a big mountain and he named it after himself. Zebulon got to Santa Fe and was captured by the Spanish, who decided to arrest him. They were mad about using this. And so they were actually going to take him to Mexico City and put him in prison. They escaped down here and walked all the way back to Louisiana across the desert. And somehow made it back to Washington, D.C. This amazing story. No one ever talks about it. We always talk about Lewis and Clark. Okay, whatever. So we can't go very much detail about Lewis and Clark. So, these are some of the creatures they thought they would find. I do like the giants with the big foot to sun themselves. But the Pelargonians, the guys with the face of their stomach, gosh, that would be awesome. Wouldn't that have been just great? Yes. Why wouldn't they? These are myths, and then people just start saying, oh yeah, I saw them. And then it's amazing what people will believe. Not today. People would never believe things like that today. That's me lying to you. So with that, we're going to jump right to, we're not going to talk about this. And while this is going on, Burr began to intrigue to break away. Well, Aaron Burr's vice president. I don't know if he would actually be intrigued. It's more like he got involved in a plot to break away New England called the Federalist Plot. Burr was accused of treason, partially by one Alexander Hamilton. Remember I told you, they're really worried this country would break up, and it almost happened. Hamilton had all that same year had opposed Burr's attempt to become governor of New York. There's no way the Republicans would allow him to run as vice president again. I am going to make a quick change. Everyone relax. Enjoy yourself. Sit. Give me a second. So Hamilton and Burr began a whole letter writing thing, opposed to each other, fighting each other, angry. Both have been, their political career has been failing. Both of them were desperately trying to reestablish something. Nobody liked either one, especially Burr, who was very ambitious for political office. And that is going to lead to the Burr-Hamilton duel. Hamilton and Burr started writing letters to the editor. Why do you have a pumpkin? Okay, can't argue with that. Burr and Hamilton started writing letters in friendly newspapers, where they basically were accusing each other of various things and trying to maintain, being polite and never really saying each other by name completely. But finally, Hamilton would say Burr is a man who does not know the truth, AKA a liar. Burr, trying to reestablish himself politically, decides he has no choice but to save his honor. He did what happened all the time then. He challenged Hamilton to a duel. Now, there were duels fought all the time, and especially with the politics were brand new. How do you deal with political opponents? To this day, people aren't very good at it. All over their fought. He challenged Hamilton. Hamilton felt he had no choice but to accept the duel. Hamilton accepted it. He picked the weapons. He had specially made dueling pistols with a hair trigger. They were accurate to about 30 yards. Now, 30 yards might not seem very far, but if you're 20 yards, it's far enough. Hair trigger, fire very easily. It's still black powder, so the musket ball is going to move very slow, which will lead to grievous wounds. But they both agreed to the duel. Now, duels were fought a lot, but most duels would end basically, if I challenge you to a duel, you accept, we're fine. We both agreed. We didn't back down. Our honor has been preserved. We're not psychopaths. At least I'm assuming you're not. I'm not either. But another thing, just show up to the location. We showed up. We didn't run away. No duel, right? Or it would be common to do what? Shoot in the air. Or shoot in the ground. But remember, if you carry a pistol to a spot and you have stated, I'm going to shoot somebody, that's premeditated murder and that's capital offense and you can be executed. And so they had this whole elaborate array of things to make sure that they would have plausible deniability. If it goes to trial, you just need to give the jury an excuse to acquit you. You don't need to be innocent. You just need to be acquitted. Do you catch what I'm saying? Give them a reason. You weren't an assassin, were you? And we're talking duels. So they rode out to Waukegan Island, which is on the Hudson. And it was not clear if it was in New Jersey and New York. So whose jurisdiction is it? Clever, get it? There are a lot of duels that fought there. 17 famous ones. The people who rowed were told, you have no idea why. And they all had to acknowledge, I have no idea why I'm rowing this boat with two men with pistols. Each of them had a second and there'd be a judge. The judge would be in the middle, and you see here, they usually drop a handkerchief. You ever see a duel where they go back to back and take 10 steps? You ever see that in like movies? No, they did not do that. The judge would pace off 20 steps and they would stand. Their second would be on the side. Better see it right there. And so if I was, let's say, Hamilton's second, I would be staring at Burr. So if something happened, I could say, I don't know what Hamilton did, but Burr had a gun. Or vice versa. Plausible deniability. They can all act like I had no idea. Remember, you don't need to be innocent. You just have to acquit. Which, by the way, would be a good thing for me to say, and I said this on film now. Oh, and now I know how to beat the rat. Okay. So, stand sideways. No, they would not stand. But I like this one. He just kind of looks through it. But stand sideways. You're not supposed to wear a cloak or anything that would hide your body. That would be cowardly and dishonorable. And then they drop the handkerchief, or sometimes 1, 2, 3, but usually a handkerchief. And that's when they could fire. Usually they just would stare at each other. You fight to do it. I grew up in Miles City. The mean streets of Miles City duels all the time. You let the other person fire first, and then you just. That takes a lot of guts, though. Hamilton, we don't know what he was thinking. He was like this. He dropped the pistol here and fired with his elbow like that. Am I in trouble?
Oh, nonsense.
So with that, we'll be back soon. So with that, fired in the air. He probably was fired in the air, not to kill him. Burr, for whatever reason, maybe he really did think Hamilton fired at him, but he's standing here like this, and he said he could feel the bullet go by his ear. And remember, that's black powder. It's not smokeless powder, it's not high explosive, the bullet was really slow. So you could hear it whirl in the air, which had to be a pleasant sound, right past. So what did he do? He took very careful aim. You ever wonder what Hamilton was thinking? Bang, and then Burr. Now, I'll tell you other dueling stories, but hit him right here. Ripped apart 5 ribs, right through the lung, which collapsed it, which I guess a collapsed lung is the most explicit pain. And then lodged next to his heart. He would live for another day in agony. And he was incoherent. Really said he didn't mean to shoot. Of course, that's what he's going to say. So the sitting vice president murdered the former secretary of the Treasury and probably the founder of the Federalist Party. What a day! Hard to imagine that now, or any time in our lifetime. But that's what happened. This Burr fled. He would get involved in another plot to betray the country and have Louisiana join Mexico. He accused of treason, almost went to trial, and then it just kind of disappeared, but his career was over. Dueling kind of ended in the North. Not completely, but in the South, no way, especially the West. Tennessee was the Wild West, and there were duels in the streets of Nashville and Memphis all the time. And unlike these, people all come out to watch the duel. So there's still duels. But if you ever see the duels they have in like Westerns where they do the quick draw, no, that almost never. In fact, no one did the quick draw thing. That's for movies. Are you a lunatic? You have the gun out. But if someone's shooting at you, you're ready. But this also ended Hamilton's career. And until somebody would make a play, and next thing you know, a musical, and Hamilton is like popular again. Like he's like one of the most hated persons. This is interesting. Now people are like, I like Hamilton. Doesn't mean the musical was bad. Secretary of the Treasury.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, and so there are a couple presidents who aren't on, not on, or on dollars, but a couple people who weren't president, I'm sorry, but on currency. Franklin's on currency too. So with that, let's get to Burr's political career is basically done. Jefferson would win an overwhelming re-election victory. The 12th Amendment, though, would say that was ratified 3 years earlier. One electors vote for president, one for vice president, thus solving the problem from 1796 to 1800. But that is why we still have the Electoral College today. And you notice there are now 17 states. And Ohio, which technically wasn't quite a state, would be a state. And they got their 3 electoral votes. And so with Jefferson winning, one of his first big things, well, not first big things, but he promised he would do this. After the slave trade compromise, said 20 years, in 1808, the United States banned the international slave trade. No more kidnapping people in Africa. The thought was slavery would just kind of go away. You limit the number of slaves, fewer and fewer slaveholders, eventually gone. And that was Jefferson's plan. It's called diffusion. We'll talk about that more later, so don't worry about this right now. But you'll notice eventually go away, long after Jefferson's gone. And this is from a slave trading journal. This is what we call a tight packer. Horrific slave ship. But it didn't stop the interstate slave trade. And the interstate slave trade is going to be huge. As the tobacco plantations died off here, the cotton plantations here. The horrific interstate slave trade. And they could still ship slaves, like this, let's say they were enslaved in Spanish Cuba to the United States. So that became a loophole. But this was the thought Jefferson said, we'll get rid of slavery someday, and we won't be involved in this horrible commerce. But the commercial war, the Napoleonic War was going on. Once again, like the 1790s, this would dominate everything. And there was stalemate on the continent, Britain and France. The powerful Royal Navy defeated a combined French and British, or the powerful Royal Navy defeated a combined French and Spanish fleet. This is Trafalgar. So the point is stalemate on the sea, or sorry, Britain controls the sea. France can't get across the English Channel, yet Napoleon controls Europe. His army won victory after victory. His army over the Austrians and Russians, but this victory was the Battle of Austerlitz. So the point is, Britain, powerful navy, France, powerful army, stalemate. So both sides has tried to destroy their economic system. Napoleon would issue two decrees, the Berlin and Milan decrees, which would create the continental system. With all its victories, Napoleon controlled most of Europe, forced them to sign treaties favorable to Napoleon. And they said no trade with Britain. And I should add, not just Britain, any country that traded a lot with Britain, AKA merchants from what country? United States. And so this could potentially ice out American trade. Now it failed. The continental system failed. They thought they could starve British traders because Britain was a country of, well, as Napoleon said, shopkeepers. Now this would fail. Britain responded with the Orders of Council, a huge, long blockade of France. A blockade of France. There's a frigate, a painting of a frigate off of a French port. They'd be on these ships for a year, eating miserable food. They wouldn't touch land for a year. In the Royal Navy, it's awful. If you're a sailor, a normal Jack Tar on a Royal Navy ship, it's a 20-year hitch. Terrible food, miserable conditions. But you might have the chance for scurvy. That's kind of a plus, right? And they recruited in a very curious way, called impressment. Press gangs would go through and round people up. For example, they go into taverns and find people who are drunk and either get them drunker so they pass out or bonk them on the head. They'd wake up and say, "You're in the Royal Navy." And they couldn't get sailors. And that is going to lead to impressment. Royal Navy ships were stopping American-owned merchant ships going to France on the blockade. So what they decided to do is they would impress U.S. sailors on U.S. merchant ships. So they're owned by U.S. merchants, these sailors, and they would say, they would literally line them up and they would say, "We know for fact some of you deserted the Royal Navy," which a lot did. And a lot did take jobs on U.S. merchant ships because it was better than being in the Royal Navy. And they would say, "You people are deserters." And they would bodily take them, rough them up, and say, "You're back in the Royal Navy." I should add, what does a deserter from the Royal Navy look like? Anybody who's on a sailor on that ship. So they just would pick the strongest and youngest and fittest guys and say, "You're a deserter," rough them up and make them in the Navy. So they would kidnap sailors. Can you imagine owning a merchant trading company? Who are you going to get to be a sailor if you're going to be kidnapped and put in the Royal Navy? And so this really hurt American trade. The blockade was biting on trade. And they went to President Jefferson and said, "Do something." Well, Jefferson knows our tiny little fleet and no army, we can't do anything. And so he pushes for the Embargo Act of 1807, which means we'll trade with nobody. We figured the British and the French want our goods so bad, they'll quit. Like, for example, they want our tobacco, or British factories, the textile mills were beginning to use what crop that was just becoming important? Cotton. Well, it wasn't a total embargo, there would be some trade. The administration would give licenses to some merchants. And this is a cartoon showing merchants coming hat in hand to beg Jefferson for a license. Even dogs were coming. And how do we know? I mean, look, they translated this dog. You're probably thinking, well, dogs spoke a lot differently in 1807. No, bow wow. I'm sorry, 1808 for this cartoon. And what kind of people did Jefferson give the licenses? Huh? Well, some, but most, they're not necessarily merchants. But you're getting close. Yes,
Wouldn't give them to like the.
exactly. He gave them to Republicans, so some might be Republicans. He gave them to supporters. Anybody who criticized the Jefferson administration and the embargo, did they get a license? Remember the Sedition Act? It banned criticism of the government? And Jefferson even talked about nullification of potentially civil war. Isn't this kind of like that? Doesn't this, Jefferson saying, hey, this is what we have to do. Doesn't it seem hypocritical? Jefferson doing the very same thing for that dog. They also accused him of doing it to help one country. Because most of American trade, I'll ask you, was it to Britain or France? By far to Britain. And if we're not trading to either of them, who are we helping? Who's this? Napoleon whispering in his ear that someday you'll be king. By the way, was Napoleon short? No, he was average height. That was British propaganda. So it did, make sure you get, it did look like the Sedition Act. This destroyed the economy. Destroyed it. Jefferson never really, Jefferson's popularity never recovered from this. He wanted to become president again, even though he always said, oh, I don't want to be president. He was hoping people would come and beg. You've got to be president. Well, that wasn't going to happen. And so we went back to Monticello. And to enforce this, this is one of the curious things in American history. Most people don't know. The US government, which didn't really have a police force, employed massive snapping turtles to roam the shore. They call them grabbies. And they would grab anybody trying to trade. And snapping turtles don't let go. And so here's snapping turtle. You see that license. And there's, he tried, superfines whiskey, trying to take it to a British ship and can't swear. So it didn't, how it nicks him. Oh, the cursed old gravity. Yeah, did you even know about the snapping turtles? Most people don't know about that. Yeah. Remember, you can't criticize the embargo. Do you see it? Yeah, embargo backwards. I like that one. That's pretty good. Well, Jefferson could not run again. His Secretary of State, James Madison, won. But look at the Federalists are becoming more and more of a Northern party. James Madison would be elected president. That's all we need to know. Jefferson was Secretary of State. Madison was Secretary of State. Do you see a trend here? Madison's Secretary of State is going to be James Monroe. Wait for it. And they're all from Virginia. One of the first things they did is they let the embargo die. That is a brutal picture of them decapitating a snapping turtle. The problem is, if you cut the head off a snapping turtle when it has you, what happens? It grips harder even. Has anyone been around a snapping turtle? Yeah. Does it bite you?
Oh, I was terrified.
They're scary and they're ugly. Anybody have snapping turtle soup? I did once. You know what it tasted like? Snapping turtle soup. Exactly what you would think it would taste like. But, so that leads to the Madison administration. And that's James Madison and his wife, Dolly Madison, like Abigail Adams, another wife of a former president. The term first lady wasn't used yet. That wouldn't be until Lucy Hayes, Rutherford B. Hayes's wife. and it was to mock her. She believed in temperance, so she wouldn't let drinking in the White House. And this is all about first lady. It's kind of funny how that happens, but really incredibly intelligent and had great influence on Madison. But because of the nature of the different roles between the sexes, she was always behind the scenes. And Madison obviously was very smart too, but his wife was incredibly brilliant. We see this a few times in history. We'll see it with Adams. You'll see as intelligent as Franklin Roosevelt. He paled compared to Ellen. But the Madison administration, but they had that commercial war. And in 1809, they replaced the embargo with the Non-Intercourse Act. Intercourse means trade. And this act, the problem was, it said no trade with belligerents. A belligerent is a country at war, meaning Britain or France. That's who we want to trade with. So it failed miserably. 1809, this failed miserably. Now what? Well, they tried the second. And I would argue the vastly superior of the Macon bills. Macon Bill number 2. It's named after a Congress. Macon's Bill number 2. And this one said, okay, we will trade, but which one will respect our neutrality? Who respects neutrality, Britain or France? Who will stop the blockade and the continental system, stop impressing sailors? By the way, got to put a picture of Napoleon. Napoleon understood the value of propaganda, dramatic pictures of him. Well, France would send, their new foreign minister would send a letter, it's named after it, so it's called the Canoe letter. And in it, this letter was this rambling thing that implied France will get rid of the continental system. And that's kind of what Madison wanted to hear. But don't forget, it's going to take a year. So we're going well into 1811, into 1812. And so because of the Canoe letter, we believe France, who was lying. They were lying. And we embargo Britain. But by embargoing Britain, aren't we kind of now at war with France? And so there's this anger at Britain while the war along the frontier was heating up. Okay, just to review, remember the Battle of Volunteer Rivers and the Treaty of Greenville gave the United States this one, a massive victory over Blue Jackets Confederacy, right here. And then after that, there's going to be a series of treaties that the United States is going to pass with various tribes, and they were by definition unequal treaties. They started giving up, there's Greenville, but huge chunks of land. And what the United States would do would be, they would just find some man who was in the tribe, a lot of times somebody who might have been discredited in the tribe, and either promise him something and he would put an X on a piece of paper, or give him lots of whiskey and sign a treaty and give the United States this land. And so the US would, like for example, get this, and then immediately settlers moved into this land. And treaty after treaty. And now it really is the last chance to stop the United States. It might already have been over. 1795 might have been it. But that is where we're coming to, the last chance for American Indians to stop the expansion of the United States. The Battle of Tippy Canoe. And a lot of people forget about this name because it kind of has almost a comical sounding name. But this battle is one of the most important in history. Tecumseh, a Shawnee, following the role of Blue Jacket 15 years earlier, is going to try to create a confederacy. It's very pragmatic. It comes up with very logical reasons why we have to not only unify, but we have to quit buying. This is what he's telling other tribes. We have to quit buying and being dependent upon goods from the United States. Start growing your own food. Come back to bow and arrows. Quit buying their whiskey and rum. We have to fight together. And a lot of people came. Tecumseh is going to become a formidable character and very much terrified figure in the United States, because he was almost successful. In fact, this shows how, I'll come back to this. His brother was he was a religious leader, and he did it in a more spiritual way. to try to rally people to the cause. And in many ways, he was more successful. There's going to be a lot of one-eyed American Indians. If you're practicing bow and arrow and shooting at each other, not without the arrow or the arrowhead, but still shooting sticks at each other, you're going to have a lot of one-eyed. Point. Of course, it's kind of amazing. When I was a kid growing up, I had a set of a bow and arrow. We'd shoot at each other and had a plunger on it. Little tiny plunger. We'd shoot at the things. It's really tough. And I remember hitting my face and going, God, we play with broken glass too, but that's just, no. This is his name, phonetically spelled, Tenskwatawa. I'm butchering it. I don't know where the accent is, so I feel bad. English speakers had trouble saying his name too, so they called him the prophet. PH, not F, prophet as religion. And he, to get credibility in 1810, predicted, told people, proving that God was on their side, the gods, that the sun would disappear. He actually predicted that the sun would disappear on the exact time. It would be gone for 10 minutes and then come back. He predicted it, and it happened. And once he did that, all these people came to form around him and called Prophetstown, where he lived. And how do you know? No, what happened was the U.S. would invite leaders of the various tribes to places like Philadelphia, which was the center of science in the United States at that time. And they would basically show off how advanced the United States was. You don't want to fight us, sign a treaty. Sense? Kind of get the idea? He was given an almanac that had eclipse and a calendar and one of those new, really accurate pocket watches. Did that and very carefully recorded the days. So when it happened, the problem is once you make the sun disappear, what do the people want? They want more. And so he, to keep them rallied, he said things like, well, you become bulletproof. Problematic down the road, right? Well, with that, we're going to jump right to this. William Henry Harrison was the territorial governor of Indiana. And he has a couple thousand men, about 500 soldiers, militia, but he has cannon with grape shot. And he's supposed to do something about Tecumseh. Thousands are rallying to him around Prophetstown. That's where the prophet was. Tecumseh, in the fall of 1811, went down to get the powerful Choctaw and Creek tribes that are down here in Tennessee, Alabama. In fact, Tecumseh told his brother, who was a little flighty, don't do anything stupid. When Harrison heard that, he marched his relatively small force and encamped across Tippy Canoe Creek from Prophetstown, dug in and waited. Eventually, the prophet couldn't keep the young men who just were so desperate. You said we were bulletproof. And they finally attacked on that November morning. All-day battle, raged back and forth, but they had a fortified line and the cannons with grape shot. And even though those young men in the Confederacy, here they are following the prophet, charged time after time and nearly broke through, they were mowed down by the grape shot. And at the end of the day, our entire history would be different. Harrison would win the most important battle on the frontier. And this was such a decisive victory that the Indian threat, I'm talking about what the United States called, would be over. Never again could American Indians unify and stop the United States. The United States is going to take and they're going to conquer brutally. And also citizens of the United States would begin to change. And they went from calling themselves Virginians or New Yorkers or whatever it might be, and they started calling themselves Americans. Now, before Tippy Canoe, it was Americans were American Indians. We're all just Americans. Now, citizens of the U.S. And think about that for a second. People from Mexico don't call themselves Americans. Argentina don't call themselves Americans. Canadians don't call themselves citizens of the West do. And we are so ingrained, if you grew up here, just Americans, it just happened to say it. Wow. It's our continent. That means those who live are, they're not legitimate. Yeah, there's a lot of arrogance there. This is something called nationalism. We will get to more of this down the road. And in 1840, when Harrison ran for president with his running mate John Tyler, 29 years later, his campaign slogan was Tippy, Canoe, and Tyler too, and everybody knew what they were talking. That's something new, campaign slogans. And who did the US blame? The British. The British were arming. The British were still trading with the tribes along the Great Lakes. We're embargoing Britain. Guess what's going to happen? We'll jump right to this. The War of 1812. And the War of 1812, a whole bunch of young members of Congress would be elected in 1810. They were called the War Hawks. They were all Republicans, mostly Southerners and Westerners. Grundy's not the important one. He looked like he was going to be, but he passed away very young. Henry Clay is going to be one of the most important American politicians, and I have no idea why the fonts are different here than my normal font. Oh, and then that guy from South Carolina. Does anyone know who that is? Huh? He's from South Carolina. They're all Republicans. They all want war with Britain and war along the frontier. And they're all obsessed with land. And he is, of course, C. Calhoun. The most horrible man ever. But look at this. He's got like 6 joints in that finger. He and Clay will become 2 of the most dominant politicians. Here's one more picture of Calhoun. Do you see it? Do you see it? Do you see it? Neck hair. I'll give you 5 points extra credit. Wait. 6. 5 Monday. Yes. Last thing. We're not. So Madison reluctantly would accept the declaration of war. 1812. You don't need to know this. I just want to show that. And put the Federalists in the North did not support the war. This was a Republican war. And there's 3 reasons why. Neutrality, security along the frontier, meaning that Confederacy, and let's get Canada. But the most important ones, wipe out the American Indian threat to expansion and get Canada. With the US get Canada. As it turned out, that did not go well. Who would like to review? Yeah, Madison didn't want this, but he signed it. It became his will. All right, so you're gonna have 3 short IDs to do. You have to do Jefferson's philosophy. Then I'm going to give you the choice. One of the choices will be about the Constitution. One of the choices will be about the Federalist era. So the choices of the Constitution, remember like the 3/5 compromise, Shades' rebellion, or what's the other? The Great Compromise. Yeah, the most important one, the Great Compromise. One of those. Choose one of those. Everyone hear what I said? And then the other one, the Assumption Bill, National Bank, and Hamiltonian economics. One of those. So one about the Constitution, one about the Federalist era, and Jefferson's philosophy. Good? And then 20 other multiple choice. So there'll be like 1 question in Articles of Confederation. A couple questions about the Constitution. There'll be a couple questions about the Federalist era, Sedition Act. Right here. Right here. There'll be a question, then, the Federalists did not support the war. They blamed the British, the embargo. I think there's a question on the Embargo Act. And I know we might have to adjust it, but I've been told that they swear we'll be back in plenty of time. The earthquake drill will take like 5 seconds. We're hiding their desk. Go with your second period. We've covered everything on this list in class. I think we've got everything up to the War of 1812. We just talked about it. We got Tecumseh, Embargo, Burr, Duel, Lewis Clark. And I think the question is mostly on the Louisiana Purchase, Haiti. Don't forget Marbury versus Madison. Don't forget that court case. The Bank of the US, that's the national bank. Sometimes I refer to it as the bus. Get on the bus. Get it? Bank of the US, get it? Get it? Ha ha! Don't forget the elastic clause. Remember, that's a necessary and proper clause. I think there's a question there. The land ordinances, the big one, remember the Northwest Ordinance, set up how to become a state and no slave codes here, but that meant by it implied there'll be slavery down here. Pretty cool. And it's not safe. Bill of Rights, I think the big thing about the Bill of Rights, it guaranteed basically limited what the federal government could do. And I think I do have a question in there. Remember, it only applied to the federal government, it did not apply to states. Did not apply to states. We'll get to this 14th Amendment. We'll get to that just before Christmas break. Exciting.
Are there like different things? Those like.
I'll tell you, so I listed out everything from yeoman, the idea of the common man, weak central government, the West, and then pragmatic. And so pragmatic's most important, but pick one of them. And we got that for give me a couple of examples of this philosophy. And the big thing was you can kind of say, the common man, the common small farmers, but the pragmatic. Yeah, that'd be your best example. And what it would lead to, that could be any number of things. Louisiana Purchase to exceptional prices. And don't forget, short IDs, 3 to 4 sentences, meaning where, when, what, some kind of brief summary, example, a specific person, event, or place, and then what it led to, why it's important. And don't put down for the great compromise and for why it's important to put down, and it led to the formation of the United States, where everyone is happy and lived in a home and they all hugged once again. Give me something specific. Remember, it's going to be 20 to 30 degrees below zero tomorrow. So wear something. Oh, it's going to be really nice. Actually, it'll be cold when we walk out and probably warm when we come back. Careful with that. Yeah, rules around. That's a good question.
Okay.
I'll write that down. Tomorrow I'll have it down.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll have to go through. But being fourth is pretty good. Does it have a go? Yeah, funny.
It's not very patriotic.
You're right.
It's okay.
So, let's kind of Canadian. That's all I'm saying. I got you coming in. You guys made